Welcome to the Code Sports Sacked podcast. We're very lucky today to be joined by former New South Wales and Australian Test wicketkeeper Peter Nevill. Pete, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Ben.
Now, mate, I'm going to start with your music because I know you're a huge music fan, and I remember when you made your debut for Australia, you know, everyone was talking about your guitar playing and all that kind of thing. Is it something you've kept up? Are you still in a band these days?
I'm afraid not. Well, I am. I don't. If they're listening to this, sorry, boys. I am still in a band. It's just been on hiatus since COVID. We've got the unfortunate record of having played 3 gigs across 3 years across 2 venues, both of which have now closed down. Yeah. So the venue is the biggest hurdle. So if there's any proprietors out there that have a venue for us to play, please reach out because that's the biggest hurdle in getting the boys back together.
And how did your passion in music start, mate? I know you're a big heavy metal fan. You know, how did that sort of evolve for you alongside your cricket? Yeah,
well, actually, it's always good when on tour to have something to do. So for those that don't take a PlayStation or study around with them, a lot of guys travel with guitars. Mm-hmm. And I think I picked up might have been sort of Mitchell Stark's guitar or something one point, and just like I'd always enjoyed playing prior to that. But sort of starting to sort of like play a bit when you're on tour, it always sort of kills a lot of time, and it's a good avenue to sort of distract yourself from the game the whole time. But I used to play with Usman quite a bit. So we our video analyst at New South Wales. This is back when Aussie was New South Wales. He was a guitar teacher, so he'd often be sat there sort of coding the game. And if we were both out, we'd go around there and sit with him and like start sort of fingering chords and all that sort of stuff. And that's sort of, eventually like I convinced him, twisted his arm to play some Metallica songs with me. But it was really good fun. And that sort of, it really sort of started that, not passion for music, but just enjoyment of music and just a backyard battler.
Yeah, I can imagine Usman holding a note. And
he's much better than I am, I'll give him that.
And mate, I remember this great story when you made your Test debut, that, a few years before, you were sitting on a beach, I think in Thailand with Steve O'Keefe, and you were looking through the classifieds and, what job are we going to look for? You were looking for options outside of cricket. Do you remember that? And how close did you come from going in another direction?
No, it's a tall story. I think at that stage of our careers, neither Steve nor I had lit the world on fire. And I think he tells the story we were looking to start a bar or something in Thailand, which wasn't the case. We're looking to get out of there as quickly as possible, really, at the end of that. But no, it was a case of, it was sort of like one of those sliding doors moments where it worked out really well. He and I each had a very good season the next season, and then, we're able to fashion reasonably lengthy careers. I think, he had a lot more talent than I did, but we both took a lot of pride in being able to, I suppose, fashion something out of not much.
Yeah.
Because I sort of never really had the talent and abundance that a lot of the guys that I came across did. So to be able to squeeze as much juice out of the orange as I did, I was all very pleased with it.
Yeah, no, you made so much out of it, and we'll get to your Test career shortly. But tell us about how you ended up in New South Wales, because you're a Victorian. What brought about the move from Melbourne to Sydney?
Yeah, I always wanted to play. Like I always wanted to play first class cricket, and I'd played at the Melbourne Cricket Club. Loved the club. It was a great place to play. Was a rookie contracted player for Victoria for a year, and then after that year, Matthew Wade came up from Tassie. There was Adam Crosswaite there, and Nathan Pillen as well had moved down from New South Wales, sort of trying to crack it. So there was plenty of wicket keepers there. The kind of writing was on the wall. So had a reasonable season, but then was sort of at that point starting to look, what opportunities were elsewhere. I think I got the last rookie contract for that season, so still was sort of training with the Bushrangers squad. But Greg Shippard was fantastic. He was very sort of helpful in sort of finding me a place to land, and just coincided that when Brad Haddin started playing for Australia, there was an opportunity for me to go and join the squad in New South Wales, and packed up the car and drove up the Hume, and I love Sydney. It's home.
And Pete, Brad Haddin's someone that you've been linked with basically your entire career, starting from when you arrived in Sydney at Eastern Suburbs Club, and he was an Eastern Suburbs player. Do you remember your first meeting with Brad and what that was like?
I actually don't, but I sort of followed him around everywhere really. Both to Eastern Suburbs, to New South Wales, and Eventually got myself on a tour with Australia with Hads as well. Running drinks at the Sixers as well that first season while he was sort of playing the early games. So yeah, Brad was always so generous with his time. Put a lot of sort of work and effort into me, and I always greatly appreciated that. He probably demonstrated the work ethic that's required to get the most out of yourself. I felt like I always had that, but it was real sort of validation that was the path to getting better and better, and ultimately playing as high a level as you can.
And we've sort of seen from Brad that he's got a great coaching mind, and we're hearing it now on the Fox Sports commentary as well. Was there a single bit of advice about keeping that Hads gave you that stuck with you above all else?
Not really. I mean, wicket keeping's a very sort of a very basic set of skills. You just need to do them well repeatedly. So it's about it's more about not making mistakes than it is about sort of anything else. So the sort of repetition and training and mindset was always the really sort of key thing. The lapse in concentration sort of hurts, as much as any other discipline within cricket. But he was also like very, very full of knowledge. His brain never stopped. It was always sort of ticking over and thinking about the game, and that I suppose translates really well into he was both a good captain, but also now a good coach.
And mate, playing alongside him, whether it was Eastern Suburbs or New South Wales, did that really help your batting? Because you were often playing in the team as a specialist batsman, and you were averaging 45 in first class cricket for a long time there. Was that sort of an impetus in your batting really coming along?
Well, I think Gilchrist ruined it for everyone. You had to start being able to bat, and I'm probably fortunate that I played in the era that I did, because didn't have many shots, didn't really bring the crowds back. So it was I fashioned a game out of not many shots. Nicking the ball down to fine leg for one was my probably most often used shot. But no, it was. It's like needing to get your both sort of aspects of your game up to a required level. Otherwise, you just don't get a look in.
And mate, what was your first experience of being on an Australian tour? Am I right in saying that you went to the West Indies? Was that 2012 as a backup keeper?
I did, yeah. So I think Hads and Wadey were on that tour initially, and Hads flew back. I went to sort of provide cover. It's a very long way. It's sort of 36 hours or something in transit to get there. So it's not easy just to sort of fly a wicketkeeper in if you need one if someone gets injured. So typically they'll always take two along on that tour. So really for me it was running drinks. That was pretty much all that I did on that trip. Mickey Arthur was the coach. It was sort of all very sort of regimented and somewhat strict, and so there was no sort of beers by the beach or anything like that. It was all very
right.
We focus on the cricket and that's it. Which was I was young and eager, and I was more than happy to run drinks and all that sort of stuff as much as I could.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised to hear you say that. I was thinking West Indies, could there be a better place to be running the drinks? But
and depends on the year.
And how was the mood in the Australian camp at that time? Because we a year or so later, I guess we had the homework gate situation. I guess looking back now, or looking back after that all unfolded, could you see things brewing like that? I suppose that tension perhaps about how strict the setup was.
Yeah, it was probably hard to see for me as I just sort of joined the squad. It was very sort of green around the ears, and while it was all sort of strict and everybody's very professional, everyone's on that tour because they know how to best go about their work and get the best out of themselves. There was sort of no apparent inkling that there was going to be sort of anything like that on the horizon, but that's the beauty. You never know what's around the corner.
And mate, obviously, that little taste of it, I imagine, just spurred you on more and more to keep pushing for that dream of playing for Australia, and you really maintained that run scoring, had a couple of big years run scoring in the Sheffield Shield, and then 2015 Ashes, you're in there with Brad Haddin as the two wicket keepers on the tour. Did you initially go over there expecting just to be running drinks again for the series? Because, things dramatically changed, didn't they? One morning at Lord's, a couple of days out from the test.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, and that was that was a sort of back-to-back West Indies tour straight into the Ashes tour. So that was a very fun tour to be running drinks again. But then, things obviously, we spoke about sliding doors a little bit earlier. That was a massive sliding doors moment for me and my career.
And, obviously it was a very challenging time for Brad. Family situation meant that he had to withdraw from that test match. I remember sort of being over there as a reporter, and I think it was a morning training session, and the word started going around that perhaps Brad Haddin wouldn't be playing. How was it for you? How did you find out, that you were going to be making your debut at Lords?
Yeah, I got told obviously by the sort of leadership of the coach and selector, and obviously very difficult period for Brad and his family. So it was always sort of tinged with a bit of with a bit of sadness and a bit of it was one of those things. Then had to sort of really sort of shift focus and make sure I was switched on and focused and doing what I had to do to get ready for a test match. Probably lucky that we batted the first day and I didn't have to do a thing. I drank about 4.5 coffees and was just walking around fretting the whole time. So that was probably a good way to ease into the game. But it was a bit of a whirlwind, but one of the most special periods of my life. My dad sort of got just enough notice that he was in Perth at the time for business. He flew back to Melbourne to get his passport, jumped on a flight, managed to get to the ground sort of just in time. But to have him there and Steve Waugh present him a baggy green. It was the only baggy green at that point he'd ever presented. So I think he tried to say he was more nervous than I was, which I'm sure wasn't true. But it was just a surreal sort of period. I saw some former teammates from the Melbourne Cricket Club who were on a tour over there as well. So I saw them sort of standing in the crowd, and it was just a bit of a culmination of a whole, a massive journey just to get to that point.
Yeah.
But what a special place to play a test match at Lords, an Ashes test at Lords, walk through the long room. Even if you get a duck, you typically, well, at that stage anyway, you'd get clapped.
Yeah.
I think that changed a little bit in years to come.
A couple of years ago.
Yeah. But yeah, incredible memories.
And, were you able to take in what Steve was saying? Because I imagine just, being out there at Lords, test debut, you're seeing the old stands and the excitement building and everything. Do you sort of, is it one of those things where you can almost remember every single thing that happened that day, or is it all just become a bit of a blur?
No, it was just a blur. Yeah. I'll have to ask him sometime what he said. Sure, it was lovely, but yeah, it kind of went in one ear and out the other. It was incredibly special. I just couldn't take my mind off the game that was coming up.
And Pete, you did well. I think you made 50 odd in the match, and a massive win for Australia. And then we go to the third test, which Brad Haddin was available to come back for. And I remember myself getting a train to wherever the tour match was, and someone gave us a tip on the phone saying whoever walks out to keep in the first innings of the tour game will be keeping in the third test. What had you been told? Like, at what point did you realise that you were going to keep your place in the team, even though Brad was back?
Yeah, I think I got told at some point throughout that tour game, but it certainly wasn't the case sort of going into it, at least as far as I was aware. And it's a really sort of difficult position to be in. Like, my full expectation was that Brad was just going to come straight back into the team at my expense, and certainly had no issues with that whatsoever. But that's they chose to go in a different path, and then we went to Trent Bridge, and everything went to pieces.
Yeah, and just on Brad, like I remember reading about him sending a bottle of champagne, I think, to your room, and what was it like? I suppose the interactions between Brad and yourself around Lords, and then, because you had shared so much of your career together.
Oh, of course. Like for him and Karina to have the capacity to think about anything else at that point in time is remarkable, and they've always been so incredibly great to me and to Sammy, and sending a bottle of champagne was a really kind gesture. But just like nothing really changed in terms of the way we interacted for the rest of the tour or beyond that. I've always had such a great relationship with Brad, and he's been so generous with his time over the years. I was really fortunate to get under his wing.
And Pete, at what point does it go from, I suppose, those surreal feelings that you're out there in an Ashes and you're playing your first series and this is amazing, to I suppose the reality of what's happening on the scoreboard, because as you mentioned, it started to go south pretty quickly for Australia in Edgbaston and then Trent Bridge. At what point, I suppose, does it start to weigh on you? I suppose the enormity of losing an Ashes and I suppose an entire nation kind of following every move that's happening.
Yeah, it was an absolute emotional roller coaster. Like, I remember after Lords, like having that win inside 4 days, and then up in the change rooms, you look around and there's like, former Prime Minister John Howard, Bernard Fanning from Powderfinger, Lucas Neal from the Socceroos. It was just like, it was sort of pinch yourself sort of stuff. And then, throughout that whole series, it was a case of, I suppose, when the wickets were sort of fairly dry and fairly hard, we played well and we won sort of reasonably comfortably. So there in the Oval, when the wickets were sort of spicy and a bit more sort of traditional English wickets, we got cleaned up reasonably comfortably. The highs of Lords, sort of came off really quickly, and then, Trent Bridge getting beaten the way we did, especially after the first day. That's probably one of the worst days of cricket I've ever had. Yeah. You get bowled out for 60. I think Nathan Lyon was the first person to play and miss at a ball. Everybody else we all just sort of nicked him. And then for them to be 3 for 200 at the end of the day's play, the game ran away very, very quickly. So it's, massive high to, fairly dejected, but, you've got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and make sure you turn up the next day. Unfortunately, it was somewhat of a consolation win that last test to bring it back to 3-2. But knowing that you're part of a losing Ashes series after all the build up to it, it hurts.
And at the end of that test at Trent Bridge, Michael Clarke, of course, retired from Test cricket. I know it was a very brief stint under Michael, but what was he like as a captain? And I suppose from when you made your debut to the end of the series when he was walking away from the game.
Yeah, I got to play with Michael a fair bit at New South Wales as well. So like when he was back and captain in New South Wales, I always loved it because I got to stand reasonably close to him. He'd always been the slip cordon, and he was just the ultimate sort of professional. The way he prepared himself, the amount of physio he had to go through to be able to get up to play. So he would before the game, before the day's play, after the day's play, would just constantly be sort of getting worked on and doing very diligent with his preparation and his rehab and all that sort of stuff to make sure that he was able to play. Because it seemed as though he had like a pretty bad back issue that he carried for a long period of time. So I always sort of really admired the way he went about things. And I'm sure he would have gone into that series, hoping to be lifting the urn, and went the other way.
And Pete, we're on the verge of another big Ashes series this summer, and as a former Test wicketkeeper yourself, I'm sure you keep a pretty keen eye on what the keepers are doing in particular. The matchup between England's Jamie Smith and Alex Carey for Australia, it's a pretty fascinating one, isn't it? Do you actually think that might be a bit of a key for the series, what those two guys are doing at sort of number 7 for their team?
Yeah, I mean, well, every role's obviously important. But yeah, it'd be an interesting matchup. Actually, we had Jamie Smith came and played a season at the Dolphins at Eastern Suburbs.
Oh, right, yeah.
And yeah, you could tell just he had so much natural talent. And I believe might have been Alex Stewart, who was sort of running Surrey at that point in time, probably still is, said he thought he was better than Jason Roy. And we had Jason Roy out a couple of years prior, who was, obviously went on to dominate one-day cricket around the world. But Jamie Smith was very, very impressive. So to see him sort of get up to this level, very, very quickly, and he's still young. I think it's the ultimate test for an English player to come out to Australia and do well. I'm really looking forward to it. I haven't been watching a great deal of cricket because I've got 2 kids and they don't sleep, and I'm working the rest of the time. But really looking forward to the series coming up.
Is there anything about Jamie, watching him as a young player, that stood out to you that this guy could be someone?
Just hand-eye coordination. Like some people just have it, and you see the way they can just naturally hit a ball. It's quite frustrating when you've spent sort of 25 years of your life trying to be able to do it and you still can't. But he just always had just oozing natural talent. And
keepers, Pete, out of guys that you played against, played with, or used to watch on TV, do you have a favourite one, or do you have a favourite couple of keepers that you've seen over the years or played against?
Oh, probably Ian Healy. I suppose in my formative years, that would have been when I was sort of really young and watching the Test cricket and him keeping a Warnie, all that sort of stuff. That probably got me into keeping more than anything else. Always did enjoy watching Darren Berry keep as well. Like every now and then, I'd be able to sneak out and go to an afternoon at a Shield game at the MCG and see him keeping up to Matthew Innes, who bowled left arm reasonably quick. I was always really impressed with what he was able to do up to the stumps.
And Pete, Rod Marsh was a big fan of yours, wasn't he? I remember 2016 T20 World Cup. Rod picked you and made a real point of saying, we want our best keeper here. It's T20 cricket, yes, but it's in Indian conditions. It's going to be tough behind the stumps, and he made a real priority of selecting you. What was your relationship with Rod like?
Yeah, I loved Rod. Rod was an absolute sweetheart. He was actually, it was so, I spoke about Brad being generous with his time. While he was a selector, I actually tapped him on the shoulder and asked him if he could do me a favour. So Rod actually called all of my wedding party to tell them they'd been selected in my wedding party. One of the guys didn't believe him and told him to F off. But the fact that he was willing to do that, I greatly appreciated it. But I'll never forget a lot of what he said. More often than not, it was that every white wine wishes it was a red wine.
Brilliant. In that T20 World Cup, had you ever batted at number 11 in a team before? It was quite a unique lineup, wasn't it?
Yeah, occasionally when I do a speaking gig, I'll just take the piss out of myself and just say, I did one with Adam Gilchrist a little while ago, and I'm like, Gilchrist was obviously breaking records for a long time, but there was one he could never break, and I broke that one. And that was the lowest position a wicketkeeper has ever batted in a T20 team. Batted at number 10 in the first game. I don't think I touched 11. I think I definitely batted 10 in that first game. But whenever anybody talks about that, I'm always very quick to bring up that I actually had the highest strike rate of the whole tournament. Faced 5 balls.
Made the most of it, mate. Mate, when you went to Sri Lanka, I seem to remember a bit of a controversy with the stumping. Nothing compared to perhaps a controversy we saw a couple of years later. But do you remember what happened there? And I was wondering if, from your lounge room at home, you had a perspective of Alex Carey stumping Johnny Bairstow and whether you felt that was the right thing.
Yep. I had no issue with that to start with. Stay in your crease. So he did. I thought Alex did absolutely the right thing. They've identified that he's just walking out of his crease and not having regard for whether the ball's dead or not. So I've got no issue with that. Regarding the Sri Lankan one, so that was one where similarly saw the batter would sort of rock his weight backward and forward after he'd either leave a ball or play a shot. So the next, I'm not sure if he played a shot or left it, I can't remember, but managed to get the timing right to take the bails off. And I think it was a little bit controversial. Certainly wasn't happy when I came out to bat in the next innings. But I remember MS Dhoni sort of doing something fairly similar. Anytime I can compare myself to Dhoni, it's always nice. So even if it's just that.
And Pete, I suppose that was the start of a bad period for the Australian team, losing 3 matches in Sri Lanka, and I think it ended up being 5 or 6 Test losses in a row, culminating with the series against South Africa, where tough loss in Perth and then a rather humiliating loss in Hobart. I suppose you'd been on this great journey with the Australian team. I think you'd won a big series in New Zealand, crowned number 1 team in the world. It must have been a much tougher place to be around, I suppose, as you were going through that losing streak.
Yeah, it was all downhill from there. I remember that tour in New Zealand where we, did formally become the number 1 Test team in the world. Obviously, everyone's very happy with that. But unfortunately, we went away to Sri Lanka and Rangan Herath just ran through us. It was hard to come up with an answer to that. Wasn't for a lack of sort of planning or trying or anything like that. But to lose 3-0 in that series was sort of call it the Boulevard of Broken Dreams, somewhat colloquially. But then going into a home series, I think the view generally is okay. That was an aberration. That was a really bad series on the subcontinent. Traditionally been hard to sort of tour and win over there. Coming into an Australian home summer, losing the first Test, especially with, I think Dale Steyn went down early in that match. So they were a bowler down. To lose that test, really put us under the pump. And then sort of going down to Hobart where we got knocked over very, very comfortably. The South African quicks just ran through the team, and I remember Callum Ferguson, getting run out. That probably summed up just nothing going right. And then, once that happened, heads were always going to roll. Yeah, you lose a home series after losing an away series. 5 tests in a row. Yeah, I think everyone was looking behind them.
And you mentioned, that was a low experience when, Stuart Broad ran through you at Trent Bridge, I think it was. But with, tell us what it was like in the dressing room in Hobart, after match over in sort of 2.5 days. It must have been a pretty quiet dressing room.
Absolutely, and it's also not a very, it's a reasonably large room down at Bellerive as well, so everyone's kind of dispersed in their own little spots. Sort of, it's hard to pull sort of everybody out of that, but I suppose after a fair bit of introspection, the group was sort of pulled together, and then I think everyone was sort of sent back to play Shield cricket, so that there was a little element of naughty, go back and play Shield cricket. You're not having a break leading into the next test. But I think a lot of people were very eager to get back and perform, because a lot of people sort of fell under the pump. And then throughout that Shield round, Rod Marsh had sort of left as chairman of selectors, and then they've obviously sort of come in with a mandate to take the team in a new direction. So it was a horrible feeling being in that room after that test loss. Who
came in and spoke to you? Did Darren Lehman speak? We heard Pat Howard. Did James Sutherland come in and speak? What was the series of people, I guess, addressing the team?
Yeah, it was all three. Yeah, I think all three of them spoke. Don't think Rod said much. There's not much to say, really. But it was made very apparent that plenty of the people sitting in this room aren't going to be here the next game. So, and that comes with the territory. Everybody, I don't think there would be anybody in that room who needed to be told that.
And were you feeling that yourself, Pete? Like, were you worried about your place in the team after that test?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'd made a 50 in Perth, but that's sort of entirely irrelevant. Like it's over a sort of long enough period of time, I just hadn't been doing well enough. I'm sure you'll sort of cover it off. But there were plenty of sort of narratives around why a change was made, but ultimately my output wasn't where it needed to be. I'd been averaging sort of low to mid 20s with the bat, which just as a test keeper, that's just not up to scratch.
And mate, the reason, as we'll get to, that was given was, that perhaps they wanted a bit more mongrel, someone who was going to, be a bit more open to sledging behind the stumps, get the noise levels up. Leading up to that point, I mean, how many times had you heard that as a criticism of you, that that you were too quiet, that you were too nice? Was it something that anyone had ever said to you at any point along the way?
No, I'd never sort of never received that feedback, but I was always focused on my team rather than focused on the opposition. So in terms of sledging, I wasn't in my nature. I didn't sledge the opposition. A lot of people will do that because they feel they get more out of themselves in doing it. Anytime I'd done that in the past, didn't work out very well. It just distracted me from what I was doing. And I found I performed better if I just focused on sort of myself, but also then sort of, encouraging my team. But yeah, it wasn't a thing. It was I wasn't making any runs. That was ultimately what it came down to.
And I mean, I presume you wouldn't have known this at the time, but we've read since that Greg Chappell walked out of that selection meeting. He was so furious about the reasoning being given for picking Matthew Wade over you that the idea of a wicketkeeper being picked because they're going to sledge more. I know what you're saying about making the runs. Not making enough runs, but were you disappointed at the reasoning that was given to you? Could you believe that was the reason why you were sort of left out of the team, or at least that was publicly put out there?
Yeah, because I suppose all I went off was the conversation that I had with the new chairman of selectors, and it was a fairly brief conversation because it's certainly not a case of me saying, "Hang on, I need some more reasoning here as to why I've been dropped." I know why I've been dropped, but there wasn't any sort of anything in that conversation that hinted at it was about sort of having more of a presence on the field. Like I would imply that MS Dhoni doesn't have much of a presence on the field. Like he's not overtly loud. Doesn't get in people's faces, but no one cares because he makes runs, keeps really well, and did it over a long period of time.
Hearing Greg Chappell's reaction and going back to your relationship that you had with Rod Marsh, who was obviously a keeper's man, had Rod stayed on the panel, do you think, there might have been a different outcome? Because, it's hard to imagine Rod sort of standing for that sort of reasoning. Do you think that played a part, having Rod, a supporter in Rod, sort of leave the environment? Oh,
it's hard to say. I mean, at the end of the day, Rob was a chairman of selectors, and he made decisions, that he thought were in the best interest of the team. So if he had stayed on, there's no, that I don't think necessarily would have changed anything. There was some, I was one of the obvious people to get dropped off the back of that game, and I sort of made peace with it fairly quickly, but was then very determined to get myself back in. Yeah. And mate, over the years, at the time and then as time went on, there was a lot of people who were outraged on your behalf at how that had all played out. Did you, I suppose, as the years went by and you hadn't got back in the team, was there any kind of, perhaps not bitterness, but, disappointment, I suppose, that, that a sort of a non-cricketing factor perhaps played a part in, missing out on the team? Not really. I suppose the biggest disappointment, was trying to get back in about a year later. So I felt like I went away, started stringing some performances back together, made some hundreds through that period, felt like I was keeping reasonably well. The selection process leading into the next Ashes, felt like I was sort of right in the mix, and was probably more disappointed sort of not getting back in the team at that point, more than I was about getting dropped a year prior. And I was going to come to that because I think it ended up being a bit of a shootout, didn't it? I think it was the incumbent, who was Matt Wade, yourself, possibly a young Alex Carey coming through, and then sort of out of nowhere, not even playing first class cricket, Tim Paine was announced. Was that a shock to you? Like, you obviously felt you're a big chance for that team. Yeah, I felt like I was a big chance, but I suppose I just wasn't performing at the right time. We had sort of 3 Shield games ahead of that first Test team getting announced, and sort of my understanding was I was sort of really strongly in the mix, but ultimately I didn't land a knockout punch in any of those games, and the rest is history. Sliding doors. Were you stunned when Tim Paine's name was the one that was read out? Yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised. I certainly thought it was. Obviously you mentioned myself, Wadey and Alex Carey. Who I thought were definitely the front runners in that aspect. But good luck to Tim. He had an opportunity. Took it with both hands, and the rest is history. Peter, I just was wondering, as you sat at home in Sydney, presumably when Australia toured South Africa in 2018 and the Sandpaper Gate controversy played out and there was so much commentary at the end of it, I suppose, obviously you were at peace with the reasons why you were dropped and all that kind of thing, but did you feel that the message that was sent by, wanting to pick a wicketkeeper who had more aggression, who was going to sledge and be a bit more of an aggressor on the field, did you feel looking back that perhaps that was a sign of things going in a off-course direction for Australia? Just the mentality, I suppose, that led to that of being this kind of super aggressive sort of team? Oh, it's hard. I mean, I don't have an opinion on that. I suppose you can sort of draw some parallels, but no, it certainly wasn't something I was sort of thinking, or I certainly wasn't sitting there with an axe to grind. While it was really disappointing that was the end of my Test career, you then start sort of focusing on, what's in front of you. And I was enjoying playing Shield cricket at that point. Had one eye on my next career. Was having kids. You've got all these sort of other things that sort of fill that void that was a massive focus of your life. But then it just naturally sort of dissipates, and you sort of follow it less, you watch it less. You still love the game, but it takes up sort of less of your bandwidth, I suppose.
And what have you made of watching Pat Cummins as captain now? Because a quote from him sort of stood out to me recently when he was asked about sledging, that he kind of feels it's a bit cringe, guys sledging when it's not really in their personality. And I imagine, that would have been a nice thing for you to hear when you were playing. Do you like the way that Pat goes about it, the way that he kind of just encourages players to just be themselves?
Yeah, Pat's brilliant. So he's, a brilliant human being, an outstanding cricketer, and a great leader. Like the way, he's always very measured. He's always, he knows the game exceptionally well. It's kind of nice to see a fast bowler being captain as well. I know it'll please Jeff Lawson. He always always felt that bowlers made ideal captains. But yeah, like Pat's obviously had a remarkable career, but I'm sure he's got a lot of unfinished business that he sort of wants to tick off throughout the rest of his career, however long that goes for.
And Pete, just to close off on, I suppose, that whole chapter of your career, in the subsequent years or after you retired, did you ever hear from any of the old selectors or coaches or players, about, I suppose, what had transpired and how your Test career came to an end?
No, not really. No. And it's sort of not something I would ever be bringing up. So it's, no one's ever sort of, wanted to talk about it, but it's all sort of buried in the past. And it's not something I sort of give much thought to anymore.
Mate, just taking you back to 2014, obviously the most tragic event that's happened in cricket. Unfortunately, a similarly tragic event has happened just recently with a young cricketer in Victoria. But you were on the field at the SCG the day when Philip Hughes was struck. Being the wicketkeeper, I think you were one of the first people to get to him. And I remember you sort of sprinting out onto Driver Avenue to try and hail in the ambulances. What an awful experience to be part of, and how much of an effect has that had on your life?
Yeah, it's incredibly sad. For someone as talented as Philip as well. It's kind of. I think it was very scary at the time that it can happen to Philip. It could happen to anyone. He was a much better batter than all the rest of us. But I don't remember running out to Driver Avenue. My former sort of agent said like he was out there and bumped into me and said I was screaming for an ambulance or something. But I don't recall that bit. I was actually I was at short cover, so Hads was keeping at the time, and sort of after Phil got hit and sort of fell over, I sort of ran over. Was sort of standing there with my hand on his back, and I think everyone was in disbelief and just waiting for the medical team to come running out, and in the aftermath as well, sort of incredibly sad to lose someone that way who had he loved his cows, he had a brilliant sense of humour, he was just a very unique individual. Very sad to lose him in that manner.
And I suppose as cricketers, like how could anyone be equipped to deal with that kind of situation? It must have been a harrowing thing to go through in the days, the weeks, and even the years afterwards.
Yeah, and everybody deals with it differently as well. So some people, react to grief, in sort of fairly typical ways, and others sort of don't. It's a very sort of unique experience that, we actually had a whole heap of players fly in from all around the country, and just sort of the SCG was just open for a couple of days for people to sort of walk around and pay their respects and sort of all that sort of stuff. It was a sort of crazy moment, but the who's who of cricketers were all sort of in the one place, all sort of collectively mourning one of the brightest talents the game's seen.
And Pete, you retired from the game, 100 first-class games for New South Wales, a very fine Test career, the 17 Tests that you played. I know, you've sort of told a few stories against yourself about your your batting ability and all that sort of thing. But how do you look back on your career? And I suppose there must be great satisfaction in getting everything out of yourself. Like to be able to get every ounce out of your ability, and to, I guess, reach that pinnacle that so many people set out to achieve and very few do.
Yeah, I even when I sort of stopped initially, like I look back on my career with so much sort of gratitude and fondness to be able to play for as long as I did. For someone who had no shots and just sort of enjoyed sort of being amongst it, to play for however many years, it was sort of 15 years almost of professional cricket. I feel like I got everything I possibly could out of it, but the game gave me so much as well that I'll always be grateful for it. Nothing but fond memories.
Pete, can you tell us about what you're doing now? What are you up to after cricket?
Yeah, so I work for a high net wealth investment advisory business now. So throughout my career, you said I loved guitar, so the only other things I really loved were cricket and investing. So that was always a real sort of passion of mine. So while I was sort of still playing, after all the Australian stuff was finished, I ended up doing a master's and started working for a financial advisory business, which we then did a management buyout of. It's essentially a business that a guy called Charlie Viola started about 23 years ago. So it was Pitcher Partners Sydney Wealth Management, which I sort of joined while I was still playing cricket, then did a management buyout. It's now Viola Private Wealth. So I'm a partner there and an advisor there. And that sort of takes up all my competitive energies now, sort of, growing that business from, we've got sort of $2.5 billion of other people's money that we count at the moment, but growing that into a really formidable, the best known wealth business in the country is the focus. And
any cricketers come to you for any advice at this point, mate?
We've got to keep that confidential.
Like you say, it was an interest of yours, investment. Like, how did you explore that, I suppose, as a player and start to learn the ins and outs of how it all works? Yeah,
so I think there was always a sort of group of people who loved talking about investing, and predominantly it was all sort of share market investing at that stage. It did sort of broaden into other things for some people who went down the sort of path of those cartoon monkeys and crypto and all those sort of things that got spoken about in change rooms. I was always I steered sort of very clear of that. But started broadening into other things, syndicated property, unlisted infrastructure, other types of investments that sit alongside those equity pieces to help better diversify portfolios, but ultimately to generate sort of outsized returns over time. So getting to understand that aspect of things, and sort of, I met Charlie Viola sort of 10 years ago at the SCG at a cricket appearance, and then he's just had a place for me to land as soon as I wanted to. So once I'd done all my study and I was still sort of playing for New South Wales, really just went headlong into that. And that's now the focus of all my sort of competitive energies now. It's great to have something that you then sort of, what cricket did absorb is then sort of divert to another area. But I love the investment side of things. I love sort of working with clients and sort of helping them get to where they want to be over time.
Pete, we sort of know how precious fast bowlers can be about their run scoring, and Mitchell Starc obviously has a test 99, and he got close one day in a Shield game where you had to declare as captain. Was it more difficult facing Mitchell Starc after that innings than it was in the nets at training?
Oh, it was always difficult facing Mitchell Starc in the nets, but so felt like we were running out of time to win the game. Needed enough overs to bowl them out. Starkey was on sort of 80 odd perhaps, and declared, sorry Mitchell, he's got a higher test score than I do, so he can hang his hat on that, but I'm sure he's going to get there. This Ashes series, Mitchell Starc 100, I'm calling it.
Was he the scariest bowler you ever had to face in the nets?
Absolutely. He certainly was as well when he was young, because he didn't probably have the control that he has now, and early season in the SCG nets, some spicy wickets and Starkey sending him around your ears when he wasn't meaning to was never fun. But to have played with guys like that who have then gone on and just dominated international cricket for such a long period of time, it's sort of quite remarkable when you look back and they're just these bright-eyed young guys who come along and and then are able to play, as much cricket as they've played. It's truly remarkable, especially for like a group, like the Big Four that have played together as well for so long. It's incredible. So I pinch myself as well that I got to play with those guys.
Yeah, you played with some of the big stars. What was David Warner and Steve Smith like to share a dressing room?
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. As well, like, starting with David when he was playing for Eastern Suburbs, batting with him when he decided he was going to change stance and bat right-handed, just because there was a short boundary on one side of the ground, and just started hitting sixes. Just incredible. It's the best vantage point to be.
Yeah.
To be able to watch guys like that go about what they do.
Pete, you had an outstanding career, both for New South Wales and Australia. It was a pleasure to be able to cover your career. You had some great achievements for Australia, and I think above all, just the way you carried yourself as a player and you played the game in the correct way. So congratulations on everything you achieved, and thanks for joining us for the SAC podcast.
Thanks, Ben.